I want to share with you something interesting, and I want to idea I heard many years ago to express the today's Tanya in this unique way. It brings out the. Sorry, guys, I got a call in the middle. Okay, so I love the idea because it brings out today's Tanya very well. So I think I shared it with you once or twice before. I want to describe the difference between, let's say, thoughts and action. Okay, so a lot of things are words. We process our thoughts in words. We process our emotions in letters and shapes and those things, and then we process it in our speech. So you grow up in a certain culture. You grow up in your mind. The way it works is very much influenced by your culture. We discussed this. Remember, like everyone who has experiences in life bases it on their notions are on their experiences in other areas in life, and they translate everything through themselves in their prism. But I want to show you the distance, though, that although you use thoughts, shapes, and letters, your prism in your brain, through certain shapes and letters in your speech, also uses letters and shapes and words, and action also uses the way you think and the way, everything's made up of shapes and forms and so on. Your manner. I want to show you the difference between the world of thought and the gap between the world of thought and the world of action. So if I asked you the question, can the equation that 2 + 2 = 4, that world where that thought exists, that there's a mathematical equation, 2 + 2 = 4, can that thought go through the wall? So you have a hard wall, a cement wall. Can that thought move through the wall? And it's a funny question. And the answer would be, it could. It's not limited to the wall. The wall a hammer could smash through the thought. But really, the reason why it doesn't really make sense, kind of, that question, is because the world of thought is a very different world than the world of action. So if I'm in the physical world, someone's in jail, they have a very strong wall. They can't get out of it. Their physical body's in a physical world. But their brain is not limited in the jail. They can still think. Nothing's stopping their brain from working. They can still think. So what I'm trying to say is that you can't compare. I guess, they used to say as kids, what's faster, to New York or by bus? Or pick a color from 1 to 10. Makes no sense. It's because a color and a number are not in the same wavelength. It's a completely different wavelength than each other. So pick a number. So what I'm trying to say is you have things in life that they're not in the same, radio station. They're not in the same wave radio where the other one is. Completely different than each other. And you can't compare the two to each other. So in our world, even within our world, we have different realities, different dimensions that they're really different than each other. And they can't compare them because they're just so different than each other. So how much more so Hashem, compared to our world, even our highest level of our world, he's just infinitely greater, and you can't even compare it. And therefore, us trying to understand Hashem is us understanding something that's completely beyond us. And that is where Tanya wants to go today. Let's learn inside. There's another interesting point, but we'll make that later on. Just because the creations don't have the ability to grasp God. The whole world came from the beginning of creation, which started from the level of wisdom, which we discussed at length. That's discussed at length in yesterday's Tanya, that the first dimension, the first reality, the first part of existence is that world of thought. And that's how human being operates. That's how the whole world operates. That wisdom is the beginning of the existence of our physical world, and the bottom of our world is action. That's why, because when we say God is so much greater than us, so when we want to describe how great God is beyond us, we say, look, relative to God, our highest level of wisdom and our lowest level of action are both action relative to him because he's so much beyond us. So relative, there's no, even though we want to look at our world, take the highest level of our world and lowest level and say there's a huge difference between them. They're not relative to each other, but relative to God, they're on equal footing. Okay, they're exactly the same because God is just so much beyond that. Like the example I gave yesterday, that if you have a 1-year-old kid and a 2-year-old kid look at each other, and the 2-year-old's like, well, I'm way smarter than you, I can do much more than you. And then you compare them to a 30-year-old, and the 1-year-old and 2-year-old all of a sudden are not so different anymore. So too with Hashem, but what words should we use other than that? We can only talk in our experience and our existence. So when we say we can only talk within our understanding of creation, so with the world we know, so what we say is, listen, the highest level we know is relative to like the lowest level we know. But is that really true? Is the highest level that we know equal to the lowest level we know by Hashem? No, Hashem is even greater than that. But we don't have words to describe that. All we know is our world. So what we have to say at some point is whatever existence we know, they're equal relative to Hashem. Our highest level and our lowest level are exactly the same relative to Hashem. But is that the true fact? No, it's infinitely greater than that. Hashem is even greater than even the highest level, or even greater levels than are the highest level we could reach. But there's no other words to say it because we can only speak within our existence. I hope I'm making sense. We can take questions after if people don't get it. The truth is God's even infinitely greater and removed than even the highest level of our world, of our existence, of the level of wisdom. But why do we use wisdom as our starting point to say that that's God's infinitely greater than that? Because it's the highest level we know, and all we can say is God's infinitely greater than the highest level we know. We can't talk about higher levels that we don't know and say Hashem's greater than that because we don't know it. But He really is even greater than much higher levels than the level we know. The truth is, in other words, when you say God's much greater than that level of wisdom, you're kind of saying that there is a level of wisdom, and relative to that, God's much greater. But whatever you call wisdom is nothing compared to God. So it's like saying, pick a color from 1 to 10, or pick a number from red to green. It doesn't make any sense to say that because it's not even in that world. It doesn't make any sense. And Hashem is infinitely greater. So to say God's even greater than the highest level of existence, it's not even true because He's even, it's meaningless to Him. He's much greater than even greater things than that. But that's the only thing we could use because it's the only thing we know. Okay, let's keep on going to the next part of Tanya. So like, for example, God is so brilliant, He's so smart. Let's say someone were to say, God is a genius, He's brilliant. Look what He can do. He knows all the animals that exist. He makes sure everyone has a livelihood. Okay? He's so brilliant. 1 second. You have a problem with that statement. It's because you're saying He's so brilliant. So you're using your level of brilliance, and then you're just magnifying it. You're saying He's a billion times greater than your level of wisdom. Because all you have are the things in your world. But the truth is, whatever you call wisdom, He doesn't have wisdom. He's just infinitely greater. He's not much bigger of what you have, right? It's like comparing a color to a number, or asking a thought, can the thought go through the wall? He's not just billion times bigger and larger at what you're able to do. He's not just take any computer and then magnify it a billion times and say now you have something much stronger. He's completely different lingo, completely different language, completely different existence, completely different dimension, not something that's just magnified by a billion times. Because wisdom goes on intellect. It's something that you have a grasp. Or you can't grasp it. I can't grasp it because it's too deep for me. But you can't even say that God is so brilliant that you can't grasp Him because He doesn't even have wisdom. He's operating on a completely different plane. That wisdom is nothing compared to Him. God, that's completely higher than wisdom. You can't say I can't grasp God because God's so brilliant I can't grasp Him. He's not so brilliant. Even thought is nothing in His world. So like people want to ask the question that we addressed before. How if God knows something's going to happen, why mustn't it happen if He knows it's going to happen? Because you're using your brain and intellect as a method to try and then just make it much bigger and understand it by God. But God is not just much bigger than you. He's in a whole different dimension than you. It's again like colors and numbers are not in the same wavelength. You can't. They're not comparative. You can't do comparative things. Okay, Evan, keep on scrolling, please. All of and anyone who wants to say about God, God is so brilliant that I can't understand. It's like saying, I can't understand the thought because I can't touch it with my hands. Wait, it's too smart for me because I can't touch this thought. That makes no sense. Touch thoughts, because touching and thoughts are different worlds, are different dimensions. That's exactly like by saying by God, I can't understand God because he's so much brilliant than me. He's not just so much smarter than you. He's not using smart. Whatever you know and you call smart is not what he's using to operate. Whoever says, I want to touch a thought, or I can't think this thought because I can't touch it, everybody will laugh at him. Because the ability and the capability to physically touch something only goes on physical thing that's in the dimension and the world of physical touch. But it doesn't work on intellect. It just does not work. It doesn't operate in that matter. Exactly like we want to say, it doesn't make sense to touch a thought. Is understood by God. It's like God, when you want to talk about God's wisdom, it's exactly like touch and feel in our world. Just like you can't touch and feel wisdom, you can't understand God's wisdom is like what we call wisdom is like touching by God. Even the greatest, most brilliant, highest levels of wisdom in the upper world. Even the level of Chachma, wisdom, which is the beginning of creation, which is in the first world of Atzilus, the highest, first tiny point of beginning of creation. Even that highest levels, even the highest, most prestige, most brilliant, most genius thing, it's a different dimension by God. It's not wisdom by God. It's considered action because Hashem operates in a whole different dimension in the way that Hashem thinks. Okay, let's keep on going unless we're finished there, Evan. I'm not sure if that's the last line. You can keep on scrolling. Yeah, that's it. No, there's more. So now he's going to address, here's the second point. The first point I think I made starting the class, and here's going to address another interesting point. It says that, so if it's true that God does not operate at all within our method of means of operation, he doesn't, when we say think and he thinks, it's not really called thinking, it's something else. What is it? We don't know, but it's not, we know it's not thinking. So why, if it's true that God isn't what we're saying he is, why are we even saying it about God? If God doesn't have wisdom, he operates in totally something else, why do we say that God is wise or God is kind? And all these characteristics, if you're telling me that Hashem does not operate out of any of these modes of operation, he's a different dimension, he's not thinking, and he's not having an emotion of kindness because God is completely removed and higher than any expression we're giving on him, so why even give him a title of something that's not really him? That's the next question. Interesting question time is going to ask. And this that we call God wise. Because of it's in the verses. And the rabbis of blessed memory, they talk about God as being the most brilliant mind, the most greatest wisdom. He has an interesting answer to that. It's not just a thing answer we've given before, it's because what other words should we use, which I think we might have answered before, because we need some way to describe our relationship with him. And if there's no words we could use to describe our relationship with him, how are you supposed to have a relationship with something that you don't have no clue about? That's one answer. That's not the answer he's giving you here now. He says because God, even though God is not operating out of, the dimension of wisdom, the fact is wisdom in our world comes from God. So although God is not operating out of wisdom, the reality is wisdom does come from him. So he's not wisdom, but wisdom in our world comes from him. So we could attribute wisdom to him, even though he's not using wisdom, but we could attribute wisdom to him because we are using wisdom, and the wisdom we have, the knowledge does come back from the Creator. Let's see this inside. God is with operates on a higher dimension, did create the first, starting from the beginning, the first tiny yud, the first tiny drop that brought our world into creation, which is wisdom, that created then our world. So God created wisdom in order to create the world. So, of course, if he created wisdom, he has wisdom within him. We also call God merciful and he's kind. We don't mean that God is actually kind or God is actually merciful the way we recognize merciful and kindness. No, it's not him. Those are limitations. There's no way that could be God. That's the existence of God. It's simply that when we call him, when we say he's wise and kind and merciful, we mean that wise, wisdom and kindness and mercy come from him and are brought into the world from him. And so to all the other characteristics that we keep on attributing to God. Evan, please keep on scrolling. Everything comes from God. All the characteristics, strength and severity and humility, and the manner and how they come down, and they come from him. That's known to the intellects, and how it works, how infinite, the attributes of infinite. We're not going to get into it now, but the main punchline that we want to discuss in our chapter of Tanya is that although God makes sense that God cannot be comprehended because he's in a different dimension than us, and you cannot say that God has our wisdom, and it's not even a billion times greater than us. It's a completely different dimension, and just like colors and numbers, and you can't touch a thought. It makes no sense. Hashem's thought. Why then do we call it thought if it's not really thought? And the answer is because thought does come from him. Thoughts come from him. Wisdom was used to create the world. Hashem used wisdom as a method. Hashem created wisdom and then used wisdom to create the world. And therefore, we're attributing it to God. Not that he is that, but that comes from him. And that is the end, my friends, of today's Tanya as we go over the Outer Bridge Crossing over here. Thank you, Evan, very much for sharing the Tanya. Any questions or comments on today's Tanya? Didn't see the text, but...
Yeah, are you there? Can you hear me?
I just want to... Yeah, who is that?
It's Brad.
Go ahead. Brad,
No,
what's up?
In the comments that what you're saying is that there's a thing called not even wrong, and that's what they like mathematicians call it. And I provided a link from Wikipedia. So if anyone wants to know, how that applies in the secular world, that's what they call it.